just looking at the evolution of how we've done these deals, like originally it's kind of like, oh, what capabilities do you have? Okay, great, we'll employ that and such. And then we moved kind of from direct employment on very basic work, labor and such, dating back 40 years. And quite frankly, that didn't move the dial, right? And then we moved into joint ventures, and employing when they did joint ventures or some of their direct companies, and then you find out, okay, they're having a hard time meeting all the requirements because they don't have the support and the education and the skills to be able to manage all of the various aspects. Or you find that joint ventures, sometimes they work out great, sometimes they don't. You're hearing that from the stage from some of the First Nations today. It's, okay, well, the intention was good, but the joint venture partner took all the cash, so they didn't get anything out of it. And right to the point where we started like, okay, why don't we just enter in directly into a joint venture with the First Nations and have a strong relationship and cut out all the people in between us and the First Nations, which is what led to the East Tank Farm deal. And now not only does it create income for them, but they can see the income for the next 25 years. So when they plan a project, now they can think about this project over 3 or 4 years around infrastructure for the community, education, elder care, so that they can make longer range plans and not get halfway through executing and find out they have no cash. So
one thing that really struck out for me is you were challenging other industry leaders to go spend some time on a First Nation. What do you think that would do?
Well, for me, what you start to realize is I think people, it's like oil and gas. People conjure up an image in their minds without actually knowing, and it's through a whole bunch of communication and such, but they've never actually seen it. They've never been there. They don't understand what's happening. So when you go onto a First Nation and find out, okay, wait a minute, they don't have roads, they don't have curbs and sewage systems, they don't have treated water, like you start realizing like, okay, this is not working. Like something has to be better, and we have to figure out a different path forward. And I think one of the epiphanies for me as a business leader is, okay, I kept waiting for the government to solve the Indigenous challenges around economic reconciliation. I realized, okay, we can do this ourselves, and we can't do it for all the First Nations in the country, and we can't do it as one company. But together, if all the companies started engaging Indigenous communities and Indigenous businesses across the country, oh, we can move the dial, and from coast to coast across this country. And the real opportunity is for all business leaders to engage and learn and understand and figure out where can we each make an impact.
So Suncor has done a lot when it comes to Petronor and the East Tank Farm, as you were mentioning. What's next in terms of partnerships? Well,
we're doing a lot on the gas stations. So we've gone from just over 15 gas stations 4 or 5 years ago, and today we have 36 Petro-Canada gas stations on First Nations across the country, which is super exciting. And so we're continuing to grow that. We're way beyond what we thought we would be just even a few years ago, so that's gone extremely well. And we're looking for other opportunities around whether it's involved in renewable energy or whether it's in other industry and energy infrastructure like the East Tank Farm deal, around how could we do this with more First Nations and help move the dial in more communities.
And speaking of infrastructure, we've seen the Alberta government move towards curtailment relief. I know that Suncor has a lot of its own takeaway capacity secured. Does this mean you can now start really ramping up back that production?
Yeah, they've been cutting back, or they've been increasing the quota for the industry now for the last 11 months. And so, but there's still some quota left. And so now it gives us an opportunity to take the residual component and try and figure out if we can move rail, we can increase and produce that production. So this goes a long ways to helping us demonstrate that the industry can move this oil and we can get it to markets.
Okay, in terms of free cash flow, what is Suncor looking for in terms of, are you moving more towards being preferable towards dividends and buybacks, or are you looking more towards growth, say M&A in the future?
Well, if you look at the company, we used to be a pure growth company 20 years ago, and what we've realized as time's gone on, it's like, okay, the oil demand's growing by 1 to 1.5% a year globally, and so for every company to have a growth target of 10% a year in production, it just doesn't make sense. And so what we've tried to do over the last decade is really shift this to more of an income modest growth model, where we're constantly giving back cash and dividends and share buybacks to the shareholders, while also being able to grow the company in a modest way. And we're trying to find the balance between those two. And growth could come either through M&A or it could come through our own projects directly.
So open to both, essentially.
Yeah, open to both.
Now, one thing we constantly have been talking about as of late is Western alienation. Is this something you're seeing and hearing as you're in Calgary?
Well, I think if you're in Calgary, you're hearing it, because but I think the issue with it is, how do we move forward and find a path forward? I was very happy that the Prime Minister came out and reiterated his support for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And in Calgary, people, I think, are feeling it, because they're starting to see more and more people getting hired and moving into new jobs and starting to move forward on the construction of that. That'll be significant for the industry. So yes, it's a big issue within Calgary and within Western Canada. We just need to find a path forward, and I think the Premier is definitely working to find that path forward, and we need to get these pipelines in the ground so we can move forward as an industry.
And are you confident we're still going to see that moving forward when it comes to these pipelines?
Oh, for sure. I've always believed that the Prime Minister was genuine in his commitment, and it's nice to see him reinforce that.
One big issue we're starting to see, though, is with the Keystone spill in the last few days, and we've had Bernie Sanders now come out and say he'd like to scrap the entire pipeline. Do you think this is going to be a big U.S. election issue when it comes to pipelines and Canadian takeaway?
I think it's going to be an issue. I think everything to do with energy is an issue in the U.S. This isn't the only pipeline in U.S. history that's ever had a spill associated with it. So when it's a Canadian line and Canadian industry, I think it makes it easier for them to make an issue of it. But they're talking about shutting down all fracking in the U.S. as a political issue as well. So I think that between the Democrats and Republicans, these are obviously hot topics. Where it goes, I don't know. I'm just observing as everybody else. But energy and how to deal with climate is an important factor. And for us, whether the people are for the climate and trying to deal with the climate issue, or they're for the energy side, we need to chart a course. And our objective is to continue to keep the company strong and continuing to grow our production and such, but also dealing with climate. And so our objective for 2030 is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions intensity by 30%. We have big decisions that we've had to make to be able to drive that, like our recent cogen $1.4 billion investment to take 2.5 megatons of carbon out of the environment. It's like taking 55,000 vehicles off the road. These are big steps in the right direction. We need to keep doing them.
And last question, when you talk to foreign investors, how are they feeling now about the Canadian oil sands? Has there been any change?
Well, it's been a very tough go around foreign investment. You can see it in the stock price for the Canadian patch, but that's true globally. Like, people are concerned about, I don't know, will oil be part of the future? And quite frankly, if you look at hydrocarbon-based energy, it's 80% of the world's energy today. So that's not going to change anytime soon. With all of the focus on renewables and everything else, it can't even keep up with the energy growth within the world, let alone shut in all of the hydrocarbon-based energy. So we need to figure out how to drive down the emissions in the base business and the production that we have on stream today, while looking for alternate energies. And we're doing that as a company, whether it's converting, like a small equity interest we took in a company called Enerchem in Quebec that converts municipal garbage to energy, to fuel. It's like, these are two societal challenges, and when you do that, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So they literally have negative emissions versus putting this garbage into a landfill. These are the types of solutions we look to. Is that the solution? I mean, it's going to take all sorts of different solutions and technologies to be able to change the world. But we plan on being part of that and part of the solution, not part of the problem.